What's going on, guys? This is Mike with the 1% Mindset Podcast. I have a special guest, my pastor, Mr. Brandon Wattz. How are you doing, good sir?
Hey, what's up, Mike? Good to be with you and good to be with your listeners. And so proud of you and all that you're doing. And you're such a brilliant guy. I actually would say that you're more, I don't know, man, just your character and your integrity shows greater off camera than it does on camera. I just want your listeners to know that. So glad to be with you today.
Oh man, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Thank you, man. It's definitely an honor to be with you. For the next couple minutes or so, kind of just let this podcast flow. So, first and foremost, I always give the guests an opportunity to present themselves, just because I don't think I can do them justice, right? And just with all the things that you've been able to do and grow, I want to give you an opportunity to introduce you for a second, and who you are. When you think of Brandon Wattz, like what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, first I would say, man, is servant of the Lord Jesus Christ. He is certainly not just someone I preach about or read about or quote about. But this is somebody I try to live my life to strive to be like, and that's Jesus. So son of Christ and husband of Ty Watts and father of two boys. My oldest is Brandon, my youngest is Jeremy, and lead pastor of Epiphany Church. I think if you would ask me how I define myself, it would be in that order: faithful servant of Jesus, husband of Ty, father of two boys, and pastor of Epiphany Church.
Nice. And I think that's a great place, to really like dive into those three elements. I think that's really important. And I definitely want to start with the family aspect. If I'm not mistaken, I know you met Ty fairly young, like, or 18, yeah. 19, or, between around 19, that age.
She was 18. Yeah.
Yeah. So pretty early on, you met Ty, and a few years later, I'm assuming you got married. Well, being so young at the time, 19 years old, meeting Ty, what was that experience like, with Brandon at 19? And you were how old when you got married, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, I was 19 when I met Ty. 18, she was 18, and then when we got married, I was 22. She was 21.
22 at 22 years old, I just graduated college, and I didn't even have a. I went from having a girlfriend to a single man. So what was that like? At 19, 3 years later, and ultimately getting married. There had to have been something there, and just transitioning into that. Like, what did that look like at the time?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think the short answer is it was beautiful. I think we made a commitment early on that we wanted to do life together, and so we wanted to. She was in school at the time when I met her, and even when we got married, she was finishing up school. Likewise, I was in school as well. I kind of pulled back from school for a little bit and then jumped back into it later on in my 20s. But, we just made a commitment that we wanted to figure out life together. There were some pieces that, that weren't there, in terms of like finances. I probably should have been in a better financial place. But again, we both were in college, and we were just like, man, let's figure it out together. I think what made things more, I guess, difficult, I wish we had taken some time to just be just us in marriage. And once we got married, we were married August 3rd. We found out September that she was pregnant. And so it was quick. We immediately moved and evolved into being a family. So we were married family quickly. And so, that presented, different dynamics to our, what you would call in Genesis 2, oneness. It tried, it helped us to figure out, like, how do we do this with three of us? And then that became four of us. But by God's grace, we were able, to figure it out and, be sustained through it. We're making 20 years next year. We just made 19 years. Yeah, we just made 19 years. So we're trying to plan out something to celebrate each other and celebrate the marriage. But it's been beautiful, man. It's been a great, great, great road. If I had to do it again, I would do it in a heartbeat. If I had to pick and choose someone else to marry, it would be my wife right now. I would pick her again in a heartbeat. Yeah. So it's a beautiful thing, man.
So let me ask, because a lot of men, especially, we want to, and I guess I'll speak for self, right? I don't want to speak for the general body, but there's a certain level of provide and protect, right? That's there. And one of the things you said, you wish you were in a better financial situation, and a lot of people are stopped by the fact that, like, hey, I don't feel like I have it together yet, so I can't not have it together and bring someone else into my dynamic, because it feels like chaos. And for you, it seemed like you just went all in, even though you didn't know your you didn't feel like your situation was, whole or complete at the time. Like, what was that, like, what allowed you to go through with that, understanding the dynamics of, what a man, should be. And I don't know if that was instilled in you or if that general consensus was there, but for a lot of men, it's like that. So I'm curious, like, what made you go forward knowing that?
Yeah, Mike, you're completely right, man. In fact, I've done a ton of premarital counseling over the last several years with young men that are like, oh, I don't know if I'm ready. Like, we're engaged, but we're gonna push it off a few years. And the reasons typically revolve around exactly what you just said, Mike. It's finances. They don't feel like, they have, what they should have. And I do think there are some elements that should be in place. Let me give you an example. I think even if a young man or a young lady doesn't have, finances in place, what I'm looking for is discipline in place, because finances will come later. What is enough? Like, when will you ever have enough? Like, is there a number? Is there, a specific metric? Like, how are we defining what is enough? Because let's be honest, you'll never have exactly what you want. You'll never be completely ready. Some of it you have to lean on faith, but I do think some of it is just wisdom. I want to see discipline. I want to see passion. I want to see that you're a good steward over what you do have. And so if you have a job and you don't, you're not making what you want to make, or you're moving toward a specific career, you're on a stepping path towards something, I want to know, like, how are you stewarding what you have on your plate now? If you're reckless with your money, if you're lazy, if you're sitting at home, you're not looking for a job, then I would be concerned about marriage. I would say, hold on, there's some things that you just don't have in place. But if you're like, man, I'm working hard and I'm in school and I'm, whatever it is, I'm not making what I want to make, but I'm grinding at this job and I'm paying off debt. And I'm like, yo, that's beautiful. Let's bring that. If you want to bring that together with somebody else, I think that is what you look for. You don't necessarily look for what is the number that they should be making or they should have before I can actually get married. You'll never, it's you're chasing a ghost. It's unattainable, because we never have enough.
That's just, so what about, I agree with it. What about the feelings of, I guess, inadequacy amongst even men who are looking, and the reason I mention it, it's funny. One of my ex-girlfriends, a few years back, I'm pretty fresh out of school. We meet, right, figuring it out. And she's a little older and she's an eye doctor, right? So she comes out the gate, 2-3 times like my salary, at the time, right? And again, obviously there's, she has, crazy student loans. You know what I mean? There's different dynamics there. But for me, in my head at the time, I was like, I still felt like, okay, there is a space where, hey, because I'm the man, like, I have to pay most of this. When we go out, I got to pay the majority of the bills. Even in a space where, we were together or lived together at that point, right? It was, we even did like 50-50 for a little bit. And then I started to battle internally, thinking like, there's an opportunity, for, my partner at the time, to save a little more and do a little, just because of the significant increase in funds, versus me. And it felt a little unfair. Right. And ultimately that could have been self, or I don't know, like, what would you say, or what was that? I guess, what counsel would you have for something like that? Because I think a lot of men now, especially with women, being in the workplace, it's different than it was, during our parents' generations. And, women, the women typically stayed home. Now women are in the workplace. They're making money. They're doing a lot of big things. So egotistically for a man, it's sometimes it can be tough to swallow, considering what the expectations are. Like, what does that look like in terms of counsel for you when it comes to that?
Yeah. And culture has shifted too, Mike. I think not only are women in the workspace now, there are parts of the country where women make more money than men. And there are parts of society and culture where the woman won't, if you go on a date, she will not let you pay for her. You know what I'm saying? So I think
Really?
we have culture. We have a culture. Yes, absolutely. We have a very cultural shift. The most she'll let you do is 50%. You know, she won't, but I grew up in a time, I'm 41, Mike. So I grew up in a time where it's like, nah, bro, you pay for the date, And I think that a lot of that is cultural. I think a lot of that, if we're not careful, some of it can be toxic masculinity as well. That is masked in being kind and being the man and being generous. And, some of that is just toxic. And sometimes that can spill over into other areas. As a man, I not only do I have to pay the bills, but I make all the decisions. And then you start go down this list, and then it becomes toxic, I should say. And so I think it depends on the situation. It depends on where you are. If you're in a relationship with a young lady that has her career, pretty set, she's moving towards something, but she has a good deal. She has a good gig and she's making money. And, the guy is like moving towards something. I do think in those cases that, coming together and having a consensus and having an understanding. But this is why, Mike, I was saying in the beginning, I want to know what the discipline is like. I want to know what the stewardship is like, because those to me speak more than what you're making. You can be making more than the young lady and be a fool with your money and be ignorant with, so to me, it's the discipline. I think it depends on the situation. I don't think it's cookie cutter. I don't think you can take a hatchet to this situation. I think it's a scalpel. You try to figure out each, relationship and see what works for you. I have no problem. There were seasons where, let me give you an example. When we first started planting the church or starting the church here, back in 2013, I came on. I don't know if you want to get to this stuff later, but I came on to do a 2-year residency where for 2 years I worked at a church in Philadelphia where I was trained on how to, what leadership development was like. I was trained on preaching, and I was trained on how to pastor, how to pastor a church, how to grow a church. I was trained on those areas, but one of the things I had to do was I had to take a massive salary cut. I mean, massive. I left my job. I had to raise my own salary, so I could only raise a certain amount. The healthcare, the insurance was on me, and I had to stop that. And for a season, I had to go on Ty's insurance. Ty made way more money than I was making. And, we figured it out, you know what I'm saying? But that's part of what we agreed to in the beginning at 22 and 21, that we're going to figure this life thing out together. And whatever it comes up with, we're going to have to figure it out. And so sometimes I do think that the situation is imbalanced, but I would say be careful with your heart as a man. To all your listeners that are men, if you're like, I got to make all the money. I got to, not saying that you were saying that, Mike, but to your listeners, I got to make money. I got to pay for the date. It might not work out like that. Now, if you're with a young lady that's like, I will not pay for a date, I think that's something you got to talk about and, work through. So, yeah, it depends on the situation, bro.
So since you did bring up, just taking a salary cut and kind of just going into stewardship, we can kind of dive into that. So you're in the Philly area now. You're I believe you said you told me you're at like Verizon or a telecommunications company, doing well, and then you decided something shifted, and then you decided to kind of embark on your journey now. What happened?
Yeah, it's interesting, man. And this is how it was nothing but the Lord, Mike, because you probably have heard me tell this story, man. I'll tell it quickly. But yeah, I was working at Verizon Wireless on the corporate side. I was working in the department, the BFO, Business Financial Operations Center. I had no degree in finances, but by God's grace, I was able to move up to some really high positions just based on the knowledge that I knew when I was there. And I would get trained by somebody that only knew specific, unique stuff in the company, and then they would leave, and then I would move up to their position, and then I would learn something, and then I would move. It was the weirdest thing how it happened, but I found myself in some really high up meetings, in the executive meetings in Verizon Wireless. And so I thought that was it, man. In fact, my wife and I were looking at houses in Alpharetta, Georgia, because, you know, one of the things I was looking to do was go down to Alpharetta, Georgia and take a higher position down there. So we were loving it. She would go to business trips with me down there. And honestly, man, when the Lord began to crystallize the idea of starting a church, that's how I knew it was the Lord, because of what I walked away from. Like we were setting we were getting that comfortable life. But I think even that, the Lord challenged, like, you know, what is life? Like, what is mission? What are you? I was a Christian, but what are you giving your life to? Is this leaving legacy? Is this going to have impact? And so, interestingly enough, Mike, long story short, Ty and I both started to sense a burden for the inner city at the same time. We just bought a house about 45 minutes outside of Philadelphia in the suburbs, and we just had this feeling of, this isn't it. Like, we're going to give our life to just this. Like, there has to be more. And she at the time was working in Philadelphia at a clinic called Esperanza, that's Spanish for hope. And they were giving out healthcare to people that didn't. They were giving out treatments to people that didn't have healthcare in the inner city. And it was a Christian organization, so our heart started to burn for the inner city. We were attending a church that had a very open hand model. They didn't count success as a church, you coming in. It was you coming in, getting filled up, and then going back out to be on mission. And so they had this idea, like, man, we want to evangelize the world. And the best way to do that is starting churches. And so the Lord started to burn that in my heart at the same time he was burning it in Ty's heart. And so when the Lord started bringing this idea of planting a church, we had no clue where. We just knew that the Lord was calling us to something, and we wanted to be faithful to it. We knew we weren't ready. The vision wasn't ready. So we knew we needed training. Then we started the conversations with the elders down in Philadelphia, and they're like, man, you need to do a 2-year training where you sit here on staff, you learn ministry before you go out. And that's what we did. We followed their instructions. We followed their guidance, particularly my pastor, Dr. Eric Mason. Just follow what he was telling us to do. And by God's grace, we were able to listen and glean and learn a lot. I got to sit in on meetings, Mike, that, were invaluable for who I am today and how I think today. A fly on the wall, these meetings where, they were discussing these big budgets, and I'm like, I can't weigh in on them because I'm not on the board or I'm not an elder at the church, but just to sit in, just to be a part and just to be a learner and student was invaluable. So yeah, that's how it crystallized. And so that was 2013. I did that to 2015. And then May of 2015, it was about 12 of us that all had committed to the church. Most of them, Gabe, Keisha, Tasha. It was some other people that have moved away, Daryl and Trish, and Chrissy Renate and Tashina. It was just a few of us that all got together and said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to start a church. And so in 2015, we were commissioned to start a church. And June, we hit the ground running, man. We were sent in mid-May. We hit the ground running in June and started doing Bible studies, man. So,
and you guys were doing that at the time. Is this at that point, were you in New York or you're still in the Philly area when you made that decision?
So the residency, when I mean residency, the training, the 2-year training was set up in 4 parts. I won't go into all the parts, but the last part of the 4. So it was broken up 6 months, 6 months, 6 months, 6 months. The last 6 months was less training in Philly and more stuff in New York. And so I found myself consistently coming back and forth. And then we are a part of a organization called North American Mission Board. They had housing here in New York. And so in 2015, May of 2015, they opened up one of their spaces for us. And so all 4 of us, my wife and my 2 kids, we moved into their place called the David Dean House. So on 21st in, I guess that's Sunset Park. Is that Bay Ridge? Sunset Park. Anyway, so we moved over there, man. So 2015, we moved to New York. So by the time we started to do church stuff here in Brooklyn, we were living in Brooklyn.
So did you know at the time that you were going to be like in New York, or like, how did, I'm assuming they plant churches everywhere, right? So what made New York that spot? Was that like your decision? Was that like, what did that look like?
Yeah, that was the Lord really putting it on Ty and I's heart, to be honest. So Ty she's born and raised here in Brooklyn, particularly Bed-Stuy. And so when I met her at a wedding here in Brooklyn. I was living in Jersey. And so I was every weekend, I was always in Brooklyn. All of my friends were at least from 19 and up. My friends were here in New York. And so I felt myself here every weekend. And I had a love for Brooklyn, but it wasn't, how do I say this? I loved Brooklyn, but I didn't love it to live. I loved it to be here and then leave. It was too, my father's in the military, man. So I grew up mostly down south. I process a little bit slower. I move a little bit slower. New York is very boom, 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 boom. And I didn't think that was sustainable for life. I thought it was just good to come in, hang out, and leave. So when we got married, bro, we moved to Philly, and we moved there for 14 years, outside of Philly for 14 years. And then when the Lord started to lay on our heart the idea of starting a church, honestly, I was thinking of a few places, and one of them was in Jersey. And we drove over to Jersey and, kind of scouted the land. Numbers 13 talks about how spies went into the land in Cana and, scouted out the land. So we kind of did that. We just went over and looked at the territory in Jersey, and it didn't feel like home. It didn't feel like that's where God was calling us. And then we came to a funeral. A good friend of ours, her father passed away, and we came to the funeral. And we were already thinking about places to start a church. And when we came to the funeral here in Brooklyn, it felt like home. It never felt like it felt like home. We were like, this is it. And so what we did was a couple of weeks later, we came back and just did a mission trip here. Just literally, when I say mission trip, Airbnbs were popping off at that time. We got an Airbnb in Bed-Stuy, and we literally just Ty and I walked the streets and prayed. And that's what we did. And it was Valentine's Day weekend. So we ate in the restaurants. It was cold. Yeah. We ate in the restaurants. Mike, I still got pictures. I'll show you them next time we're together. But we walked the streets, prayed, and ate in the restaurants. And then we went to a church up here that we were good friends with. And that weekend, the Lord sealed it. We knew it. That week, we were like, this is where we're supposed to start a church. I went back and I told the elders, told Dr. Mason, like, this is where we're going, man. It's where God called us. And they were just such a blessing. Dr. Mason was like, man, let's do it. Let's figure it out. I brought him up here. Him and I walked the streets and prayed and tried to figure out area. But yeah, that's how we started to solidify that it was Brooklyn. We just felt like home when that feeling, Mike, when you walk in your house and you like, man, I'm home. You just take off your clothes. Just like you throw stuff. Like that's how I didn't take off my clothes when I came here. But that's what it was. This is it, man. So yeah, I still feel deeply called I feel deeply called today like I did when we first got here.
Okay. So this by 2015 you made the decision and then you started doing Bible studies with your core 12, so to speak. And you moved into the location that you are currently at in 2016?
No. So we were meeting when we first started so let me back up. The first thing we did before we did Bible studies, we did this thing called Vision Night. And it was an opportunity just to we told people to invite your friends, random people. We would walk the street. Gabe and I would walk the street with little flyers and just tell people, hey, we're having this thing called Vision Night. If for nothing else, you get free food. Just come.
It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, you're right.
Worked in college all the time.
Yeah, free food.
Yep, free in college, worked all the time.
Yeah, it gets people in the room. And it worked. People came that first night. Some people the numbers were inflated because some of our family from Philadelphia came up to, just support, show love. And then so we said, man, we got to do it again without having Philly here, just Brooklyn. Let's see who's in the room. And we did it again the next month, and more people showed up. And we were like, okay, so this is a thing. We got everybody's contact. We started a mailing list. We started hitting people up like, hey, we're moving toward Bible study in September. So that was July. We're moving towards something in September. And then we started Bible study. The first Bible study, 42 people showed up.
Wow.
And from there, and this is word of mouth. This is, man, invite your friends. Like, what would your friends like to come to? We were meeting at a place called Diamond Hall, which is on Tompkins and Putnam. And it was a good location for us at the time, but it's a long story short, we were subleasing from somebody that was leasing. So we ended up not being able to meet there. We started meeting at a place called the Voodoo Lounge on Nostrand and Halsey. Second floor. And man, it just started to grow. From every week, we would just see more people would come, all word of mouth. And then the next week, more people would come. And we were just doing Bible study. We would do some worship. It was a Sunday morning because we wanted to have that prime service time. So we did 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings. And in the Bible study stage, we just started to outgrow that Voodoo Lounge location. So we were like, we got to launch the church, which means we're now officially publicly a church. We're not doing Bible studies no more. We're officially a church. That was 2016, March of 2016. And we launched the church, went back to the Voodoo Lounge, and it was a problem, bro. It was just too many people. It was a fire hazard. We were on top of each other. It was a club, man, and we would rent out the whole spot, and it was beautiful because it gave us the vibe that we wanted, which was, man, we're a church for the non-church, the D-church, people that don't like organized religion, come and so they would walk into a club and be like, this is cool, and then we would open the Word and talk about Jesus. But then Gabe found a spot, which is where I met you at. On Fulton Street. And so we converted that into a church, did one service, immediately knew that we were going to have a problem doing one service. It was just too many people. Moved to 2 services, probably less than a year later. And then we moved to 3 services. And that's when I met you. By the time we were in 3 services, we were looking for another space, did a capital campaign, all that stuff. So finally, we're now at that transitional season where we found the bigger location that we're in transition, that we're moving toward.
So there's something to be said about, obviously word of mouth, getting people to come, growing that. And you said at the time you were doing Bible study. So my assumption is, and you can correct me because I wasn't there, it was more like teaching than you going up and actually preaching. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, you're right. It was Bible. In fact, we made sure that it didn't come across as a service. And so what we did, like, I would sit down, I wasn't standing. I think that changed it. I didn't have a pulpit in the middle of the room. That changes some things in my mind. So we were like, we wanted to be very clear that this was Bible study. And so we didn't hide it. We didn't say, a lot of people were saying, man, don't lead with it's Bible study. People won't come. Skeptics won't come. It's kind of weird for people. So don't say Bible study. But we were like, no, we're not doing that. I want you to know what you're coming to. So we said it was Bible study. I would sit down and I would open up. I would have a presentation on a screen. So I think we had like a TV that we would roll in. By the way, all of the stuff that we had in the space would be in my wife's, she had an SUV, a Saturn View, and we put a TV in there. We put so much, man, I'm surprised it never got robbed because we left it in the car. We would leave it in the car. And then we go to the spot and unload it. And it was a Bible study. It definitely was not a service.
So the reason why I wanted to ask that is because, it's interesting. You got people to buy in each and every week to come to this Bible study to the point where it was almost cool, right? Like, I can't miss this. What do you think was so unique about that Bible study as opposed to maybe any others that kept people coming back, that kept it growing, so consistently, even before you moved into the church?
You know what? I think there were a lot of factors. Number one, I think we were very transparent and open and honest. Even at that Bible study stage, Mike, you probably would have really liked that season of our church, because after I would teach, in the middle of Bible study, we would break off into smaller groups. And so all over the space, it would be like pockets of 5 or 6 people that were all in smaller sections. And they would process the word together. I would ask a question like, hey, y'all got 15 minutes to process that. And then they would process. And then what we noticed was early on that a lot of young people really were digging that vibe. They were going, in the beginning, we could tell that we were getting a lot of transplant from other churches where the church, they had a lot of questions, but they had no one to answer them. And the churches that they were going to didn't allow spaces for them to ask questions without being deemed as something's wrong with you, or you just don't have enough faith. Whereas we were like, no, come here with your questions. I think the word, has some answers for you. And then music, bro. We've always tried to be very, very, very strategic with our music. It's attractional. This is Brooklyn. It's attractional. We want a good vibe of music. And so we've always invested into the music department. That drew people. Sometimes people wouldn't come because I was teaching. They would come because they liked the music and they liked the worship. And we did food every week. So they they would come get coffee. And then we were short. Churches around us had service 3 or 4 hours. Hour and a half, we were out. We were done. Go live life. Go have brunch. And so people really dug that type of atmosphere. And it was in the season in terms of church history. I don't know how much you follow church history, but church history would say, I think somewhere around between 2010 to 2015, there was a shift in people's desire in what they wanted out of church. And I think, just the old traditional model of church, I think young people, not older people, young people started to, they didn't like going to church with grandma. So we found that our church wasn't the place that grandma would drag your kid in. Our church was the place where their kids were dragging grandma in, and they were dragging mom in, which was unique for us. But I think that shift happened somewhere between 2010 and 2015. We took advantage of it. We were like, man, we're a place where we're not traditional in the sense of you don't have to put on a suit. We'd have people walking with 40s straight off the street. Like, yeah, you're welcome. Please come in. And we try to make that so normal. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, we just try to do something different, man. That's all.
You get into the new space, and now you transition from Bible study to church, right? You preaching, the worship, all of that. In the space, obviously, that's something, this God put this on your heart a little later on. That, I don't know if you remember your very first service that you did where you had to preach in front of Epiphany Brooklyn and the crowd. Obviously, what you do now is a lot different than what it was back then. What was that feeling like when you had your very first service at, as a church, as officially a church, launching a church and actually preaching? How did you feel? What was the feedback like? What was that experience like? Because I think it's an interesting space to go back and look like, man, this is, It feels like probably completely different. Like, what was that like that at that moment?
That's good. I probably cringe when I think back to that first service that we had. We actually did something called a pre-launch, which was, so we launched in March. We did a pre-launch in January. It snowed, so we pushed it to like the following month. So February, we did a pre-launch service, which was, we invited people and said, hey, we're practicing what it's like to have a service. We didn't have we're practicing collecting money, and we didn't have anything in place. But I think, in those beginning stages, it was, you have a kid that is coming from Verizon Wireless that doesn't have any real ministry experience. I did not have the luxury of being able to have a year of being able to preach weekly. I didn't have that. It was jump in, and by God's grace, the church was gracious. I think I was too over people's heads in the beginning. I was just I probably still am at some points, but I really love the Bible. So I felt when I would enter the room, I would say to myself, everybody in this room loves the Bible the way I did. It took one of my mentors to tell me, man, when you're preaching to people, that you're not a good communicator if you're preaching it complex. A good communicator preaches a complex idea with simplicity. And so you have to find a way to be way more simple. And so just to answer your question, I think in those beginning stages were, not that I'm not developing now, I'm still developing, but it were very developmental. Even coming from Bible study to preaching on a Sunday morning, I still had in my mind Bible study mode. I like teaching the Bible. I like talk. I like history. I like I like digging into I never grew out of the why stage. How does this work? Why did he say that? Well, what does that word mean? How does that translate into Greek? And like, I really want to dig deep. And sometimes in the very beginning, if I'm honest, I think I probably was I brought my study time on Sunday morning, whereas the average person is just like, man, I had a rough week. I need something that will build me up, give me I want to learn something, but I need some help. I just need some help. And so I think over the years from 2015 to now, I've tried to develop in how do I preach the word to where it's what I would say is expositional, Mike. Like what did the author mean when he first wrote it? And I want to communicate that. But then I feel like I've tried to grow in how does that apply to 2021? That's where I missed before. It was just everything was ancient. It's like, well, I'm in 2015. How does that translate? And so I think, to be honest with you, man, I probably would cringe and think about those first few public services and how I was communicating. Wasn't the best, that's for sure.
Do you think as a pastor, you suffered from imposter syndrome at all? Like knowing that, you studying from Dr. Mason and seeing all these other pastors who probably have years and years of experience. Like, did you have that like imposter syndrome feeling at all?
For years, bro. For years, Mike. For years, I could not find my voice. I felt like in order to communicate, I had to communicate like the people that I really liked. And so I would watch people and, it was never content. I wouldn't steal anybody's content, but their delivery and their methods and how they communicate, how they raise their voice, how they use their hands. It's like, I would watch some things and I would say, that's what I want to do. So I found myself in a inauthentic way communicating God's word. And it was my pastor, Dr. Mason, that said, look, man, it's going to take you at least a year, 2 years to find who you are. You're going to wrestle through trying to communicate through everybody else's voice. But when you start to communicate like you'll start to preach to people's hearts. You'll start to see that you're way more comfortable. And I would say that probably started to happen around 2019. What's unfortunate, Mike, is, and I knew you at this time, I started to get more comfortable with being able to communicate with a room full of young millennials. I started to be really comfortable. Then the pandemic hit and I was preaching to cameras and I had no clue how to do that. So I'm like, well, you were there, man. How do I communicate to a camera? And I'm still not there. I still don't feel all the way comfortable. And so I don't know, man, it's always a learning process, but yeah, imposter syndrome, I don't think I struggle with it much anymore. I listen to a lot of preachers because I like a lot of different styles of preaching, a lot of different styles from all different backgrounds, ethnicities, and denominations. I listen and appreciate everybody. As long as the content is centered on Christ, I can listen to anybody. But no, I try my best to just be who I am and not be anybody else. And I'm growing in it.
Yeah, I definitely want to, salute to you and shout you out. It's definitely not easy to like you said, to preach to a camera, to motivate, especially when you can't see the person either, right? So a lot of people feed off of energy and responses and stuff like that. And as you're going to the camera, you're just hoping like, hey, that joke hit, right? Or you know what I mean? So yeah, I can imagine, what that's like for you as a.
Well, you do this well, Mike. Like you're talking to a camera now. You're very fluent. What's unique about Mike, and this is for your listeners, man, is I've seen Mike and I've watched you like being able to communicate in this space, but I've also seen you just in a room, be able to just talk, communicate with people. But what y'all don't know is Mike is also like a servant. I mean, this past Sunday, like he was behind the camera. He was behind the, in the tech room doing stuff. And so like, I appreciate guys like that. You know what I'm talking about because you've been able to experience communicating on camera, off camera, and behind the camera. So, this feeling I'm talking about of, yeah, sometimes not just jokes. Sometimes the jokes don't hit, but sometimes you don't know, a preacher you don't have to it's a conversation. Like I'm talking to a room full of people and y'all got to talk at least in the Black culture, y'all got to talk back to me. And sometimes I can see it on people's face when something is hitting, you know, when something is penetrating a heart, I can see it. Sometimes it's tears in the middle of a sermon. I can see someone with tears. Sometimes it's shame, and it's like, oh, I got to lift that shame. And man, I could, you know, I could point them to the comforter. Like there's just little triggers, you know, as a communicator, that you have to scan the room, and you have to find it's at least 3 or 4 people that I'm looking at. And it's not always the same people. 3 or 4 people I'm looking at, and I'm gauging, how's that person doing? How's that marriage doing? But they're the litmus test for the rest of the room. And so once I zone in on a few of those people, I just feel like, you know, I can flow a little bit better. Man, that's why I'm really excited. I was going to announce it here, but I have to hold it. In the next several weeks, we are about to move back to in-person service. We're kind of in a transition. Downstairs of our space is being renovated. It's about to be renovated, while upstairs is where we're going to meet for a little bit while we're transitioning. And bro, I'm stoked because I'm over the virtual. We're still going to do virtual, but I need people in the room, man. So yeah, it's definitely difficult.
That's interesting. One of the biggest fears that people have is public speaking, right? Did you have any issues with that, especially as you started to grow and, you know, you start to preach to more people? I know you've traveled to different churches across the US and preached. Did you ever have that, right? Like just the butterflies, the nerves, like that fear that most people have?
Yeah, I think so. The short answer is yes. I have butterflies, not just in the beginning, but I have them weekly. And I probably have more butterflies when I'm at Epiphany than I am somewhere else. And I think it's because of the responsibility tied to my communication. Like, you know, and some of this is good and some of this is bad, but, you know, preaching is authoritative by nature. And, you know, Paul will say it in First Timothy 3. He says in Titus 1. He says it in First Corinthians. And it's very clear, like, there are some people that will hear you and say, man, like, I'm going to run with that. And so I'm not nervous that I'm going to fall or mess up. Like, those things happen. I've said things in the pulpit that were a complete blur by accident. Like, I can't believe I said that a few times. And some of it I've had to go back and apologize, either to my wife, like, I didn't mean to say that, or to the church. I would have to come back the next week and be like, hey, last week I said this and that wasn't cool. So I'm not nervous at that stuff. That stuff happens. The best speakers mess up if you just give them time to just keep going. But I'm more nervous about getting it right. I want to get the word right. I want Jesus to be honored, and I want people to be edified and transformed. And so I think I'm more nervous weekly about that. But if you're not nervous, I would probably say, I wonder how much of it is confidence in yourself and even pride and arrogance. I'm nervous every week. I'm pleading. I'm up at 5:30 on Sunday mornings, Mike, every week, because I'm spending time praying. I'm spending time reading. I'm spending time going back over what I'm saying, because I want to be faithful to the word. And so, yeah, I get nervous, but probably for a different reason than why most people get nervous. I read a stat, bro, that said that some people are so afraid of public speaking that they literally would rather die than publicly speak. Like, people are more afraid of speaking than being around snakes or spiders. Like, public speaking is like a top tier of what brings people fear. It doesn't bring me fear, man. By God's grace, I was able to, like, when I first started to really love teaching the word, I was teaching at a church. I was teaching, like, they had this pre-Sunday school thing. It was a room full of old ladies. And no lie, they loved me, bro. They let me talk, and I got all my jitters out there. And so, like, in terms of, like, oh man, I'm gonna say the wrong thing. But then over time, I was just like, man, if I mess up, man, I'll come back and apologize if it was real bad. If not, I'll just come back and do better the next week. So
that's I mean, that's definitely a good perspective. Like you said, some people would rather die than publicly speaking. You know, people are so afraid to, like you said, get things wrong, right? You're implying because you didn't say the right things, it's wrong. And me doing a lot of speaking myself, whether it's, in the schools, I've spoken at colleges, have youth that I speak to. That was the one thing that I had to be 100% comfortable with, is just knowing that I'm not always going to get it right. Like I made wrong bad, and it wasn't right. Like it was just, hey, it's something that I have to adjust, I have to change, right? There was no like good or bad to it. It was just, hey, it was wrong. I said it wrong, come back, apologize, and move forward. And I think, the fact that, you've caught that early, and you're able to say, hey, next week, hey, I messed up, my bad, whatever that looks like, it allowed the transition, not only the transition, but just your comfort level in speaking like that much more fluent and fluid for you. So I think that, that's absolutely amazing. Now, I do want to ask another thing. I want to respect your time, so I won't go too much over. Okay. The church you grew, and I didn't know this. I'm happy you told me your Bible study grew pretty quickly. You got into the church that you outgrew the space very quickly, went from 1 service to 2 services to 3 services, which again, I salute you for being able to do 3 back-to-back services like that, because speaking and being able to create impact, doing the same thing, or not the same thing, but the same message, so to speak, to 3 different groups is tough. I know that because I've done it, right? Back to back. And it's like by the 3rd one, I'm like fried if I had to do it. So I definitely, commend you for just creating a new experience each and every single time. I think that's a very unique gift. And, just as a speaker myself, I'm curious how you're able to do that. One, actually, I'll ask that first. How were you able to do that, to create that new experience every single time, knowing that you were delivering the same message, so to speak?
Yeah. And let me make it a bit more complex. So yeah, it wasn't just the same message, but we do books of the Bible. So we go through, we'll take Romans and go through all 16 chapters, which we did. That was our last book we went through, but also trying to figure out how to say the same thing different ways, because a lot of Romans is redundant. It's like the same, sometimes it can be the same thing. And so it's like, how do you make not just each service unique and impactful, but how do you make each week that's part of a book series unique? And how do you communicate in a way that's, relevant to people in each service, each week, that it feels new, fresh, and it still takes work. The 3 services, I think, what I was fighting against was not to be a robot by the time I got to the 3rd service. I was fighting against trying to make sure it was unique, because what I do is, and I don't know how other people communicate, but he's not a mentor, but someone I really look up to, a guy by the name of H.B. Charles. He's the pastor of Shiloh Baptist Church down in Jacksonville, Florida. And he has a ton of, you would really like him if you don't know who he is. He has a ton of podcasts. I used to go down to his, he used to have a conference for preaching. It was called Cutting It Straight. I would go down there every year down in Florida, just sit through all the classes and learn how to preach. And, one of the things that he often says is write yourself plain. You have to write out your manuscript plain. Now, I can't get up in the pulpit and preach from a manuscript, because I will find myself reading, and I don't like to read while I'm communicating. I like to have eye contact. And so I do triggers. I write the manuscript, and then I do triggers. And by the time I get to Sunday, I'm pretty locked in on exactly the flow, exactly the communication. There's some things that, the Holy Spirit will add in there, but I'm usually pretty well prepared. So what happens, Mike, is I got to be careful, because service 1, I'm just figuring it out. Service 2, I'm probably getting the kinks out a little bit more. Service 3, I've practiced it twice that Sunday. It's so easy to get up and then just literally be a robot. I can preach it with my eyes closed. And that's not how preaching works. You have to be able to engage and penetrate people's hearts in the room. And so I found myself fighting by the 3rd service. Stay engaged. Don't be a robot. I know the next point, but fill the room. Maybe somebody needs something else. Maybe you need to spend some more time on a specific point. Maybe you're too long on this point, and the 3rd service needs the last point. So I found myself making sure I was present, because I can easily get into robot mode. And then, Mike, you would know this, man. I preached so many sermons at this point in my life that I literally, this is bad, but it's true, bro. I could take the Bible, go like this, put my finger in it, find a text or a passage, get 3 points out of it in probably 15 minutes and preach it the next. Now, that's not good, but I could do it. If you forced me, if you put me in a corner. In fact, I had to do it before. When I was in Philly, my pastor got sick. I think he had strep throat, and there was multiple services. And he called me. His wife called me and was like, "You got to do the next service." I don't have anything, so I literally I had people at my house. I ran upstairs. I closed my eyes. I found a passage. I put 3 points together, the illustration, some exhortation, and I put it in a sermon. And it actually was pretty impactful. But you got to be careful with stuff like that, because then you find yourself leaning on your own giftings and not the Lord. So yeah, that third service, I had to fight myself to be present, not be a robot, and preach to the room that the Lord has sent people in. Preach to that room.
There's two really big things I took from that. The first one, I didn't know you wrote out every single, like the manuscript for every single service. That's interesting. I've never done that in any of my speeches. But the second thing was,
it's not how you're wired, Mike. Is that why you haven't done it?
Yeah, I feel like for me, if I see something like that, like a lot of the thing, I'm really good at analogies, right? I think my speaking has become impactful because I can use everyday life. I can find something and I can use an analogy that makes sense, that it resonates with people, and kind of go from there. Right. Okay. And I do that typically off the top of my head. It's probably not the best thing to do.
It's a gift, bro.
But one of the things you said was sometimes you shouldn't necessarily rely on your own gifts and, kind of take it from there. And that's one of the things that I realized as well. Although I had this gift of being able to, because I found it by accident, right? It wasn't, I didn't know this was something that I was going to be able to do. But being the fact that I realized, like, man, I can use an analogy that makes sense, right? And it can resonate with people. Like my speaking, I had a speaking gig at BMCC, a college in the city.
Yeah. Okay.
And it was a professor that saw a video that I put on Instagram. And when I used to do the videos, and I don't do them as much anymore, but back in the day, I used to do a lot of videos. I used to go with my camera person, and I would just, what do I want to talk about? Boom. I want to talk about this. Great. Let me put something together on the spot. And I would just speak to the camera. But I understood through watch me like tonality, right? So when I elevate my voice, it requires more attention. If I'm more sympathetic, it's like I'm trying to penetrate your heart. Like I started to get that as I was speaking. So I knew the point I wanted to get across, how I needed to speak. Hand movements is something that I've always done. Like I started to get that and understand that just by doing, right? I never did any kind of public speaking thing or I just started to know and learn because I did so many videos talking to the camera. So I definitely, the manuscript piece is definitely pretty interesting as well as just saying, not being a robot, being able to not just rely on your gifts, but, using God and just being able to feel the room and understand that. I think that was, it's definitely huge, man. It definitely stood out. I'm not sure if I'll be able to use the actual manuscript thing, but definitely utilizing some of those other things. I'll ask one more question because I know we're a little bit over time. So thank you for your grace with that.
You're good, bro.
So I was getting to you've grown fairly quick, with the Bible study going from 1 to 2 to 3 services to where you basically outgrew the space that you were in. Fairly, obviously the pandemic gave a little bit more time. But when I was there, when I got there in 2019, I believe, 2019 is when I got there.
I remember.
Yeah, you guys pretty much outgrew the space by that point already, right? This is why you have to go to a third service. Why, what, how do you think you grew so quick? Like, what happened? Churches typically, at least that I've been a part of, or that I've seen, may not necessarily grow that rapidly, that quickly. How was that? How were you able to do? How was Epiphany Brooklyn able to really do that and sustain it to where I think you guys may have even grown during the pandemic? I'm not, quite sure. It may be tough to tell, but it looks like it's a very it's continuing to grow pretty rapidly. How did that happen? What do you think was some of the key things, for that growth?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's making sure that we understand that it's God's church and God builds his church. I think that sometimes that can almost be like that answer, like, oh, just have more faith. But it's really true. Matthew 16, Jesus says to Peter, I will build my church upon this rock I will build my church. And it becomes very clear in Jesus' statement that it's Jesus that builds his body. And so that can be universal church, but universal church is everybody in every part of the world that has professed faith. So, we got brothers and sisters in Uganda and China and Yugoslavia. If you've professed faith, you are part of a body, right? But then that works itself out in the local church. So if the Lord is building his body and people are being funneled to local churches should be growing, at least in the way it works in my mind. So I think the first answer I would say to you is, Mike, it's God builds his church. He sends people. He moves on hearts. He gets people awake. He gets them to come. It's not by accident. But one of the things I think in terms of strategy, one of the things we tried to do was we tried to look at the retention rate, and we tried to see how big the back door was. People come into the room. Are they going right back out? Are they coming the next week? Are they coming the following week after that? And so we tracked everything. It's kind of hard now in the pandemic because of the virtual world. But when we were together, Mike, by the time you came, every service we tracked, we knew who our first time visitors were. We knew who our second time visitors were. And so we're trying to continue to we would do little strategy things. We did an Uber thing at one point where we were like, if you come to church for the rest of this month, if you come to church to any of our services, we're going to give you a discount on your Uber ride. And so just hit us. And people would hit us in our DMs, and we would send them an Uber code, and they would put in the Uber code, and they would get, a discount on their ride to church, and that would get them to come to church. And so it's little things like that. But once you get them there, how do you keep them? And I think there's a few things in terms of strategy. We want to make sure the music is relevant. I said this before, but it's so important, Mike. The music has to be right. So we want to invest in that. And so Josh is doing a phenomenal job, Josh Ortiz, with our music. And then we want to make sure that the preaching is impactful and relevant every week. And so that becomes important. But then I think, it's also important for people to see that the church is doing something like in the neighborhood, and not that that's an attractional reason why we do stuff, but it is important for people to see that single moms are being taken care of, and we're investing in schools, and we're investing in the local businesses. That's really important. So I think all of that coming together, and then sheep begot sheep. Young people that are in different professions and in different parts of the world. We would say, man, bring your friends with you, and then that people would bring people. So I think it's the assimilation process into a church. Anybody can just go sit in the church and never come back. But how do we get you to come back? How do we become that? Starbucks used to do this thing called the third space, where they were like, man, we want to be your third space. Your first space is home. Your second space is work. Where do you hang out after that? Come to the coffee shop. Come to Starbucks and have a cup of coffee. We want to be your third space every day. Well, the church wants to be that space. We want to occupy a relevant time of your life. And we want to add value. We want to make sure that you walk away and feel fed and hungry, and you feel like you can impact the world because you came and you stuck around to Epiphany Church. And last thing I'll say, man, I know we're over time, is discipleship, bro. Discipleship. People have to be, we're getting better in this. We weren't good at the beginning, but we want people to be a part of groups of other believers, and we want people to grow in their faith together. And so I think the discipleship is important, not just for people coming to the church and staying, but also so that leaders are developed. That's Acts 14. Disciples were made. They appointed elders. Well, leaders were made out of the disciples that were made. It's that simple. So yeah, there's a lot that comes together, but ultimately I would say it's God, and then putting some strategy behind it, I think is important.
What's the vision for the church now? Now that I know the mission remains the same, but now that there's an expansion, we're in a new space now, a bigger space. What does the vision look like now?
Bro, I'm so pumped for the next season of our church. We're in that transition right now, but they are. The staff is pumped. I think our leaders are pumped. We're now in the season where we're investing in our leaders. We're trying to enhance how our ministries operate in a functional way. But we are preparing to open the doors of the church. As I said, we're going to do renovations on the first floor, which we've submitted our permits and all of that stuff so that we can legally operate as a church. And while that's being done, we're going to meet upstairs. We have to cap it, not because of COVID, but for legal reasons. You can only have a certain amount while the occupancy of the building is coded one way for the city. So we're going to meet upstairs while we're working out occupancy downstairs. And then eventually we'll transition downstairs and we'll do work upstairs. But I'm excited, man. I think I'll tell you this, and some of this is just spiritual. When you start a church, Mike, a lot of it is strategic guessing. You have no clue what you're doing. So some of this, I have no clue how it will work itself out. But I'll tell you this, Mike, I came out of my sabbatical in August, really fired up that the Lord is really going to send a revival. And I just see a lot of young people either giving their life to the Lord, really committing to their faith, recommitting their faith, and just putting their hands to the plow. I think it's going to look different, but I think the vibe and the mission will still be there. We're taking over a club, bro. So we're keeping a certain vibe that I think is relevant for Brooklyn. But I just see the next season being just as fruitful in terms of growth as the last few seasons, if not more, because we have more space now.
Man, I love it, man. Pastor B, thank you so much, just for this. I definitely have to get you back on at a later time because there's so much more I want to ask, and just so much that you and Epiphany Brooklyn has done, not only in the community, but just, the reach is nationwide and probably even global now, especially being online, which is, again, it's not ideal, but there's benefits in going virtual and being online. It's definitely expanded the reach. So Absolutely. That is huge. Before I let you go, is there any final thoughts or things that you wanted to say?
Yeah, well, two things. First is I just want to say to your audience, I don't know exactly who it is that pipes in, but life is tough right now. And, this pandemic is tough. And, Mike does a great job at communicating his thoughts. And Mike does a phenomenal job at dropping a lot of nuggets and a lot of wisdom. And sometimes that stuff, we live in a tech age where it's scroll. We just keep moving. But I think anytime, Mike pulls up something I think it's important to listen to. So I just want to shout you out first and foremost. In this season that we're in, you found something that is a niche for you, and stay faithful to it, man. Stay committed to it. Don't get fluctuated by numbers. We can talk about this offline, but man, it's I know sometimes when you're looking at views or clicks, that stuff kind of it's like either it puts you in a place of pride, man, people are watching, or a place of despair. Man, I can't get it to move to the next level, man. Just stay faithful to what God has called you to. So I just want to say that to you, but to your listeners, man, I don't know where your faith is and all that stuff, but I have an agenda, and my agenda is to see people meet Jesus. And so, wherever you are with your faith, I would say, man, take it serious. There are a lot of answers in the Bible to a lot of questions that you might have. Some people have church hurt, all that stuff. I get it. I completely get it. But there is nothing like a community. There's nothing like a body that you can actually do life with and learn and grow, with. Everybody has to be taught. Steph Curry has a coach. Michael Jordan had a coach. Everybody has to be, invest in themselves in some way. So Yeah, man. Just get check out check out check out your faith, man. See where you are. See where you're going to rest your time. It's important for you. So yeah, man. I'll end there.
Awesome, man. Pastor B, thank you so much. As usual, guys, we had a phenomenal interview and human being that just shared so much and just poured into us. So oh, where can I typically ask where can they find you? But what so where, if they, want to reach out, shout you out,
Sure.
Any social media or like, where is that?
Yeah, so you can follow me personally on in two places. I'm on Facebook, Brandon Wattz, but I'm also on Instagram, B_Wattz with a Z. So B_WATTZ. You can also follow Epiphany Church Brooklyn on Instagram. You can follow us on Facebook. We are on TikTok. We're actually growing our TikTok, so be patient there. But you can follow us those three social media aspects, and then our website, and we have an app. If you're interested in it, you can go to your apps and put in Epiphany Church and get updates there. But our website is being revamped to really speak to the next season of life that we're in as a church. So yeah, check us out on any of those platforms, man. And Sunday mornings, 9:30, 11:30, we're about to start meeting together at those same times. And for now, for the next several weeks, you can check us out on YouTube and on Facebook.
Awesome. And as you see the cameras move to different angles, just know at least once a month, that's me. So just,
That's right. That's right.
So, man, Pastor B, thank you so much. Again, we had a treat, man. And as usual, I love you guys.
Love you, bro.